record.
Namthi ngiphathe ngala yakho.
Hey, tada. Sure, Yamkela. Thanks for joining me and for availing yourself for the interview today. Ngicela ushare ngama-full name wakho ukuthi lo F enhle umeleni. I've done my research but ngifuna ukuthi sizwe ngawo ukuthi Yamkela F.
Research, where are we? Intelligence agency. Why we share my background search and whatnot?
Check, you know, it
no, man. So my full names are Yamkela F Spengane. So the F stands for fortune, which is my in inverted commas Christian name, as they would put it back then, to say, you know, Africans cannot be Christians if they don't have white names. I don't know how, because these are English names and Christianity is not an English religion. So, you know, colonialism and all of that. But F stands for fortune. Those are my full names.
Sure.
And I've contemplated dropping the name completely from my from my official ID document, and I figured, look, let it be a history marker of where we come from, of where we've had to change mentality, so that when we don't name our children that way, they can understand that their grandparents were in a dispensation that forced them for access purposes and other important purposes to name their children with English names. And it's a history marker. So we come from that era of colonization, and we cannot wish it away, but we can teach those that come after us what it means to be independent, what it means to take pride in your originality, in your own language, and all other things that are implied by having a name that is yours by your own language alone.
Yeah, you've just reminded me of something. You know, I think I was in my first or second year varsity, and I was introducing myself to this guy. So I used to be part of SCM on campus. So Yamkela Mzuzukile is my name, and his response was, "What's your Christian name?" And this is a fellow black brother. Obe responded, and I think for me it was the first time that I got that experience direct. You know, I've heard stories about that, and obviously, I'm shy of God. Yeah, and I was like, you know, firstly, do you know what the name Zuzukile means? You know, it's got a lot of connotations around Christianity.
Around Christianity, belief, and everything, exactly. Yes. So, you know, it's where we come from, you know, and a lot of missionary work that has conditioned our people to say, no, if you are not a John or a Paul or what you call, you need to affiliate with this with this naming type of thing going on. But it's quite the contrary. And as you grow up, as you do your own work, your own research into Christianity as history in its own, you realize that what the missionaries brought here is very different to what was Christianity as a dispensation in the first century, in the second century, and how Christianity got to Africa was before colonization is an entirely dramatically different issue to how it's painted by modern day churches and all of that. And people don't want to do that theological background research to say, for instance, we have two big dispensations of Christianity. We have the Catholic Christianity, which they say that the first pope was Saint Peter. But we have Coptic Christianity, which got to Africa even before Rome had Christianity as an official religion 300 years later. Coptic Christianity was in Africa before 100 AD. I'm talking 37, 40 AD. We had the Coptic Church, which says that their gospel or their patron saint is Saint Mark. Now, Saint Mark came from an area that we now know as Tunisia. That's where he came from. You must understand that the Middle East, you basically walk across to what is now known as Israel, the territory known as Israel. Back then it was Palestine. There was no such thing as the state of Israel, because the last time there was a state of Israel was around 670 BC, when these people were exiled, and then after that they disappeared off the face of the earth. You don't know where they went. So there was no such thing as a state of Israel, and it's a political thing on its own, speaking about the state of Israel and where it stands today, what's happening in the Middle East, and so forth. But yeah, let's not get into Christianity. That's not our that's not our interview
No,
today.
man.
Let's
Actually, you've just laid the right context to our chat today. And you know, as you tell us about yourself, one of the things that I've picked up about you is I don't know if multidisciplinary research expert is the right way to define you. You know, but I've seen you getting into details on different topics. You know, whether it's a legal issue, whether it's about astronomy. Now we are talking about religion, and then the science, tech, math, and all of that. So can you just tell us, you know, for the benefit of our viewers, Yamkela Obani, what's your background, and what brings Yamkela to who he is today, and all these skill sets that you have?
So multidisciplinary researcher. I don't want to call myself an expert, lest I attract connotations that I cannot match up to. But I am a multidisciplinary researcher. So by formal training, I'm what you would call a cosmologist. So a cosmologist is just cosmology is a sub branch of astronomy that deals with the origins and evolution of the universe as we know it. Cosmologists will study whether the Big Bang Theory happened, if it happened, how it happened, was there anything before the Big Bang? You know, the entire way in which we believe that the universe as it is today, according to the evidence that we are gathering from our own observations, how it evolved and how it is evolving, and how we maybe think that one day it will all end, if at all it will end. So that's what cosmology does. It's mathematics that you engage with to try and give your theoretical predictions and your theoretical modeling context for people to interpret, and that's about it. The short of it. The long of it, we'd have to start opening a lot of books and other arguments, and I don't think
Yeah,
it's something that we want to do just for this
yeah,
topic.
sure,
But
sure.
I then also delved into other disciplines. What cosmology did for me is that it grounded me in the love of research. So I grew up loving this research. I was inspired by a few people in cosmology, in astronomy, in mathematics, those fields, because I grew up with an affinity for mathematics and physical sciences. So the likes of the Indian mathematician Ramanujan. He was a very sophisticated guy in terms of what he did in mathematics. So this guy had no formal training. He goes to he goes to England during World War One. As he got there, World War One began in 1914. A young lad. He was a young lad in his 20s. He gets there. He has no formal education, training, and what. He gets to Cambridge. He gets to Cambridge, gets to Trinity College, and he changes how the world views mathematics. The
Yeah,
guy was a pure genius, and his supervisor was an atheist, typical to how mathematicians, astronomers, and other scientists of the 20th century had evolved to say, no, but there's no such thing as a god. But this guy is a Hindu guy, deeply religious. He burns his incenses, he's got his idols and whatnot. And he tells them that my mathematics is an expression of God's thoughts. Every equation that I've come up with and whatnot, I get it directly in my sleep through dreams from God. So he perturbs that whole entire world to say, hey, me, I don't subscribe to this non-belief of yours and whatnot.
yeah,
Everything that I'm doing, I'm solving problems that you've been struggling with for decades. And these things
yeah.
are coming from God. They are
Wow.
not coming anywhere else but from God. So he's one person who influenced me deeply. There's another Indian guy who also influenced me deeply. He was also a young lad, Subramayan Chandrasekhar. He was an astronomer, and at that time, he was one of two, three people who really grasped general relativity and what it meant.
Yeah,
he also went from India. Well, he was in Lahore. It was part of India then. It's now Pakistan, because the India and Pakistan basically separated on the point that others were Hindus, others were Muslims,
Yeah.
and they could not get along. So the country split, and Pakistan was formed. But back then in 1910, it was Lahore, and it was part of India. So this guy in 1930 he goes to England as well, goes to Cambridge, and he solves a critical problem that general relativity had posted for stars. He basically, you can say, he's responsible for us now having a concept that we call black holes. That means areas in space with high gravity and so forth. He was one of the guys who influenced me as I journeyed into this. But what these guys underpinned was that research and hard work.
Mm-hmm.
Do not care which background you are coming from. You don't have to be from an affluent,
Mm-hmm.
nice white country, or wherever you are. If you have the tenacity, if you have the focus, you can research and get into where you need to be.
Yeah.
And I think another big influence was uh, was a guy from Russia. Now, this guy, uh, I'll actually want the viewers to research on him. Let me just name it. He's the only guy who solved one of the Millennium Prizes in mathematics. So the Clay Institute for Mathematics at the beginning of this century released 7 problems in mathematics that had not been solved. See, and they've been giving mathematicians headaches for a while. But this guy from Russia, a brilliant mathematician, he solved this. He took 7 years from 1996 to 2003. He
Uh-huh.
did not. By the time the Clay Institute announced this, he wasn't. He was already busy with it.
Sure.
He took 7 years, not communicating to anyone, not doing anything. He was solving a problem in mathematics, specifically the subset of topology called the Poincare conjecture.
Okay.
He solved it, and then he published it on an online repository, not some prestigious journal like Science or Nature, whatnot. No,
Yeah.
he published it on Archive. Archive is just a preprint repository that is run by Cornell University, and it took mathematicians 3 years to verify that he was indeed correct. That
Wow.
but he was so and he did not
Yeah.
want. They offered him the Fields Medal and whatnot. He just was like, no, I'm okay. I think you
Sure.
guys, because there was a lot of also politics around the solution and whatnot. So he just after that stopped mathematics. Was like, I'm okay with you guys.
Yeah.
I don't think you work ethically, and he left the field. So he was another genius that inspired me, that someone can focus on something for so long,
Sure.
without being distracted, and finally come up with a solution. We are talking
Great.
about 100-year problem that
Great.
he tackled,
Yeah.
and came out on top. So the tenacity there was also impressive for me.
Yeah.
So that laid a foundation in that I wanted to be someone who does my research and does my research very well,
Sure.
not only in cosmology but across everything that I do. So uh, parallel to my influences in science, I was influenced by thoughts in Black consciousness and Pan Africanism.
Cool.
And now this is politics. And now, when you are talking about a political setup, you are going to link to such things as how does Pan Africanism become realized, and then you get confronted with political systems like socialism. Now, socialism is not only a political system, but it's also an economic system. So then you have to dabble in economics and say, how does economics work? How do you understand economics and dispensation? You also
Yeah.
have to understand how education and pedagogy works in systems of socialism or in systems of capitalism. You also then have to research how governance works. What are governances or governance systems? How are they employed in different ways? So
Mhm.
it opens you up to just a whole lot of research in
Sure.
different fields that you have to do. And you understand, okay, if we are Africans and we say we hope for a day where we have a right to self determine, what
Hmm.
are the things that we as Africans have to be fluent in? to be able to self-determine in our economics, in our social settings, in our technological settings, and everything else. And through this, I was brought to exploring all the different fields that I thought that were important for Africans to one day be a self-determining people, to have what we call a United States of Africa, where we can make decisions on our own behalf without seeking approval from the east or the west, where we can say we are moving in this direction without having to get consultation from Bretton Woods institutions, from the US, from the EU, from whoever else that might be, who's always had a vested interest in Africa not being able to self-determine without approval from them. And that's what has influenced me deeply in becoming a multidisciplinary scholar, because I wanted to have answers for myself, and I wanted to be fluent in the conversations of how we could realize this Africa. That's a nutshell. I hope it's a small enough shell.
No, man, there's a lot of stuff that you've touched on that have triggered other thoughts in my mind. So what I'm picking up also is how you connecting the dots. So one thing leads to the next thing. In mathematics, it opens you up to other things, and then it also shows how one can really not look at one thing and say, the answer lies here. And for me, this is something I think you might have picked up that one thing I love possibly the most is music. And what I pick up from that music and exploring and getting deeper into music is how interconnected music is. One can think, I'm a hip hop guy, I don't like jazz, I don't like classical music or whatever it is. And then you get deeper into the music and then you hear, oh snap, Nas is sampling, what's this guy's name? Is it Dave Brubeck or whatever? I forgot his surname. The Take Five guy,
Yes.
Because there is actually a song.
Al Jarreau, yeah.
No, the Take Five guy, Dave Brubeck, I think.
I'm thinking of the song Take Five. Yeah, I'm thinking of the song Take Five. No, I get, yeah. Look,
there's a song that he sampled for his latest album. So I think what I would like for you to maybe touch on, and I know that when we had the conversation leading to this interview, we mentioned about COVID-19, the challenges that we are facing. And within the time constraints that we have, I think we are left with about 15 minutes or so, so we looking at what you've mentioned around doing work within the Pan-Africanism space and what we need to do as Abantu Abamnyama. What challenges have you come across and what would you say needs to be done in that space to get the needle to move? Ne? And then in the COVID-19 space, I've seen some of your work and your post around, when it started, let me not say when it started, but early days before, there was a lot of panic. And what I found was that it was quite, insightful in terms of the kind of information you share, and doesn't have much to do with trying to put fear inside of us, but trying to say, this is what is happening and whatever, just tracking that from Wuhan and up to where we are today. And I believe in simplifying things, and maybe you can try and simplify it for the people that are listening. This is what you've observed. Tie it with what the president said last night and whether we are on the right track or not. And if you had his ear, what you would be saying to him.
So it's very trying times for the world. Globally, for especially for countries like us, we have other people making decisions that affect us, or for a continent like ours, and maybe Latin America and a huge chunk of Asian countries, which is where a lot of poverty is going to be hitting people going forward. So basically, what we are going to experience now economically is a recession as a result of how COVID-19 has affected global economics. So we've had an unprecedented way of having the global economy shut down, halt as we are dealing with this crisis. Whether the merits of the shutdown are good or bad, I don't want to go into those politics. The fact that we are dealing with is that we are dealing with a shutdown. And these were per recommendation and trends of countries that faced COVID-19 beforehand, China, then Iran, Italy, Germany, the UK. How they dealt with it was that the UK was very late, but the experience from Italy and China was that, and South Korea and Japan as well. Lockdown worked, lockdown. They managed to lock down so that there was not enough person to person spreading of the virus, so you could contain the spread of the virus. And as a result, it meant that people had to stop going to work. There was limited movement between zones, and so forth. So it brought about huge economic strain on the globe. First, it started in China, where when they shut down, because we depend on China for manufacturing hub of the world, it
Yeah.
meant that products were not coming out. There were back orders of everything, and that brought about huge repercussions in the global economic system.
Yeah.
Now, when China came out of lockdown, other places were in lockdown now, but they had a huge demand for personal protective equipment products, and other medical supplies, ventilators, you name it. So now it meant that there was this huge bidding in the market for these products that were previously like produced in average quantities, and production lines had to be ramped up and so forth. So there was now a new rush and a new strain on the economy for PPEs, while other things people don't really care about, other production facets, your cars, things that we consumed on a daily weren't really the big issue. We now had this one production, item, a group of PPE needing to be ramped up, and medical equipment supplies needing to be ramped up. So there's been a lot of perturbations in the global economy that will finally lead to a global recession. The IMF predicts that we are going to get to levels that we have last seen during the Great Depression of the late 20s and 1930s. So it's going to get economically hard. And that's why globally you've seen a lot of countries releasing what they call economic stimulus packages to try and keep their economies alive, to try and keep transactions going on. Some have ranged from nationalizing their hospitals, like Ireland did. There was private healthcare, and then they started nationalizing private. They released money. The U.S., I think, pumped in about $2 trillion US into the economy. But how they did it is different from how we are doing it. So the president announced last night that we have a 500 billion rand economic stimulus package, which is about 10% of the GDP of South Africa. But how we are approaching this is that we are going to try and, from the fiscus, reshuffle some of the budget allocation to raise about 130 150 billion rand, and then the rest of the money we're going to go in and borrow somewhere. Yeah, so this is development finance institutions like IMF, World Bank, the new development bank, which is colloquially known as the BRICS Bank, and so forth. Whereas the US, the Federal Reserve, printed money and put it into the circulation. That was the one way that they did it. They printed money, and it wouldn't be the first time they printing money and putting it into circulation. If you go back to history, and you look at the different financial crises, including the collapse of Bretton Woods one during the Nixon crisis in 1971. You go back to a few other global crises, including the Great Depression, including the World War II, and how they approached it, right back to how, when Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act into place in 1913, you realize that printing money is not a bad strategy. So, but unfortunately, us, we are not going to be printing money, or what they call helicopter money that drops out of nowhere. So I don't know whether there's prudence in that approach, but
Yeah.
basically everyone in the world, including Japan, I think released 1.5 trillion dollars, and everyone is releasing these stimulus packages to keep afloat. How sustainable it will be in the long run, we are not sure for both the countries that are printing money and for us. We saw how the global financial crisis came up about with money that meant nothing, and leading up to a collapse. We saw how getting into too much debt with DFIs also can lead to potential problems for developing economies. You know, when the IMF lends you money, it's never a blank check. They'll come and say, okay, these are the policies that you have in place. We'll want you to have a fiscal restructure here. We'll want you to prioritize money in this direction and stop spending on, for instance, with us, they would say, stop financing SAA and ESCOM, rather sell those off and do that and do that. So there's a lot of things that are going to be coming that have long lasting ramifications, whatever approach that we are going to be taking. We are going to head into a depression. That one is obvious. But number two, depressions, if you approach them correctly, have opportunities in them. People will capitalize in opportunities that come out of depressions. The last depression that we had big companies coming out of, you think about social media as a whole was a dispensation that came out of the 2008 depression. You had Facebook and all these big companies creating a new bubble that came out of this depression that we had in 2008 that affected the global economy, and moving towards things like online work, cloud computing. That whole thing came out of the 2008 financial crisis, and this financial crisis might be redefining how we perceive work, how we perceive going to the office, and companies that are leading the idea of remote work, the idea of telecommuting, the idea of how we can actually have a different way of clocking into work, a different way of being productive that doesn't necessarily bring us into harm's way when we are faced with things like an outbreak or a pandemic. Those are the companies that we might see coming out strong out of this depression, and other opportunities that will exist in how we are going to define ourselves. It could be a way to say, let the globe crash. And then if the globe crashes, let's see who comes out scrambling for what. Let's see how we redefine economic policies and economic principles. Let's see how we redefine how we as Africa approach foreign direct investment going forward, how we as Africa approach things like how we trade among each other instead of being dependent on one global partner to link us all in the way that it has been happening in this dispensation. And so COVID-19 has brought us to a point where we need to sit down and relook what our position is and how we can come out better as a continent, or else other people will come out better and then we will be worse off in the long and short.
That's a lot to digest. You touched on the issue of printer imali versus what we've done. Now, maybe in layman's terms, if we were to do that, what stopped us from doing that, and what are the consequences of that being the solution?
So one of the primary arguments that the governor has advanced, is that you when you approach quantitative easing by printing money and putting a lot of money into circulation, you risk having what we call negative inflation or a deflation. So money, that means you have so much money that it affects your inflation in circulation. But now I think that in moderate terms, and Professor Chris Malikani has done a few articles on this, trying to explain in short layman terms how we can approach printing money and literally having more money into circulation, more money in people's hands, so that they can buy more, they can survive more. And in that way, we also avoiding taking debt in dollars, because we've seen just during the COVID-19 period, the rand to dollar ratio moved from around 15 rand to 19 rand currently. So we are going to find ourselves taking debt in dollars that is tied to high interest rates. Now, for instance, when the US goes to the IMF or they want to lend money, they're going to get what, 1% interest, 1.5. We're going to get 9, 10%. And it's going to be linked into dollar debt. Now the dollar can appreciate highly against the rand. If the dollar is now moving from 19 rand and it goes to 22 rand, that means the interest component of the loan that we are going to pay also increases, increasing our debt ratio to GDP. That means we were hovering in the 60s, and we've now squarely moved into the 78% GDP to debt to GDP ratio, and we definitely now want to think of how we can minimize going taking debt in dollars as opposed to creating a way for money that is in rands to stimulate our own economy. And I would say that find ways of the government buying back bonds, so find ways of the government buying private bonds, find ways of the money that is in the monetary economy. You have money in insurance, money in the UI, money that's hanging around different places, money in the PIC and so forth. Find ways of creating channels for that money to be used into stimulating the economy, as opposed to having first measures of taking out debt from elsewhere. But I'm not sure we can cover the thorough theoretical background of this in this short space of time, because we would have to infer on a lot of economic principles. But I would say, and not this is not from an expert, that if we found a way to balance between getting money from DFIs and actually finding money in rands in our own economy and unlocking it, using the UIF, using the PIC, using money that is in the virtual economy, not in the real economy. I'm talking about money in insurance companies, money in banks, money that is not really exchanging hands on a day-to-day basis, and finding ways of bringing this money into the real economy,
Yeah.
into purchasing, into goods, into manufacturing, into financing startups. That would create a much better outlook long term than just piling on the debt that we currently have. Because as we are increasing our debt to GDP ratio, we also increasing the interest rate that we are going to be paying on these debts, because we are that much riskier to lend to. And in the long run, I think that it's detrimental to our economy.
Okay, and then with what you said in mind, what would you, or how would you advise, the SMMEs, but also, private individuals, because this is definitely not only going to affect entrepreneurs, but everyone, whether in business or not. How, well, firstly, can we COVID proof, if there is such a term, ourselves? COVID-19 proof, I mean. And what is it that one needs to do in order to, as you made reference to the businesses that came out as a result of the previous recession, such as your Facebooks, etc. How do we get ourselves into that space where we're like, okay, you know what, it's tough times, but this is how I'm going to weather the storm and come out stronger, or somewhat victorious?
So I would say that how we need to approach this, especially for businesses, is that already there are stimulus packages that are being released, like soft loans and so forth. It's currently soft loans for the most part, but there needs to be a coordinated effort to invest in SMMEs. Why? Because SMMEs are going to create more jobs for you. Uh, by organic makeup, SMMEs require manpower to grow. Scaling requires more power. So now more manpower, I mean. So if you are investing in a lot of SMMEs that are going to come out doing work in the real economy, I'm not talking like doing work of things that are needed, the things that need to be bolstered. SMMEs in the manufacturing space, SMMEs in the agricultural space, SMMEs that are in the real economy doing tangible work, then you are creating a chance to create more uptake of economy, and therefore you are reducing the burden that is on the social welfare pillar of government by absorbing more people into the real economy, doing work and earning their money through doing real work. And so SMMEs themselves have to tailor themselves to be doing real work and understanding that our investment framework does not work like America. You're not going to get an investor putting 2 billion US dollars in you over some concept like it happened with these companies that we are talking about. How investment works in America and how it works in Africa is completely different. It's not the same, and you should not be aspiring to have frameworks like Silicon Valley. Bootstrapping is our reality. You are not gonna move from unicorn, from zero to unicorn without making any real profits, without making any tangible products for the market to consume. There are companies in the US that are indebted, but they are unicorns. They are worth billions. They haven't made a single day of profit. They haven't made a single quarter where they are profitable. So our markets don't work like that. They don't invest in ideas. They invest in tangible things. They invest in things that they see are going somewhere. So our entrepreneurs should gear themselves up to making value. And once we start adding value and also creating platforms where we can come together and realize how we can collaborate. Collaboration is another key thing, how we can collaborate to add value to each other. Then we stand a chance of coming out a more self-reliant country, because South Africa consumes a hell of a lot of its products from foreign markets. Like, we are reliant on, for instance, simple things like cell phones. We don't have local brands that add value to the cell phone manufacturing space, even if it's through a small component or through owning it and reselling it through your own channels or one way or the other. But it's such a consumed product that we all rely on. Applications,
Yeah.
cars, you name it, all different sectors of industry. If we can start looking at ways on how we can be independent in some of the industrial processes, or link up a value in some of the industrial processes, then we can begin becoming more self-reliant, and that means more money circulating among small businesses, among black businesses, and among ordinary people who now have to make financial decisions that are going to be based on the recession. And I think how COVID-19 is going to affect people on a personal level needs its own video. It needs its own way where we are going to break it down, because we would not do justice in terms of the various parameters, in terms of the various income groups, in terms of the various type of consumers that we have, or types of employees that we have. We live in a country that is deeply stratified, where you have the haves and the have-nots, and there's a wide gap of inequality. And how the recession is going to affect the have-nots and how it's going to affect the haves and the people in between, we call the middle class, is really not the same. So we need to have a dedicated way of explaining how these different groups of people are going to experience something like a recession. Uh, because the poor and how they experience a recession, and the rich and how they experience a recession, is drastically different. It's not the same. People might think that we are all in recession. No, it's not the same. And I think there are two professors who recently won the Nobel Prize in economics, their husband and wife, Professor Banerjee and Professor Duflo, from MIT, the School of Economics, and they did a lot of studies in poverty. And even around the global crisis in 2008, they had a lot of research on how the crisis was affecting the poor in India. And they found that, look, the poor are in permanent recession. So whether it's a global financial crisis or not, these companies are always dealing with recession type decisions. So how this recession affects them is not necessarily the same way that it will affect a company on top that had good stock, or how it's affecting Sasol, for instance. How the stock markets have bettered Sasol in the last few weeks is completely different to go in with someone who's poor, who the recession is a difference between 15 rand and 13 rand, and you realize 13 rand, 15 rand. He's been in a recession already.
Mm.
It doesn't make, he's been in a recession already. The decision making processes that he has been making has been of someone who's already in a recession. So it's different to how it affects someone who's well off, someone who will lose a job from an income of 50,000 rand a month, stuff
Yeah,
like that. So we really would need to have a video that starts from the background of what a recession is for everyone.
so that's dope. It sounds like we need a separate topic. Sorry for that background sound. To end off our chat, everything that you've said, especially in terms of what needs to be done, makes sense why we all need to be sober. So, no alcohol.
I knew you were gonna sneak that in. I knew you were gonna sneak that in. Look, uh, I'm of the opinion that alcohol has wreaked havoc in the black community, whether we want to admit it or not. And it's not a new thing. This traces its history back into colonialism, back into slavery. How not even in South Africa or Africa only, but you can look at the Chinese experience and how when the Japanese were there, they made sure that a big chunk of the Chinese population were addicted to opium, which is the core ingredient in things like heroin and morphine. You can go back to how alcohol was used as a payment for slaves.
Yeah,
So you would have them drunk and they would not think of revolting because now they work, and then after they work, you give them alcohol, they are drunk and they pass out. There's no way that they think of plotting against you. How during apartheid, the apartheid regime made sure that in every rank there's a jazz bar. In
yeah,
every township there are beer halls, but there are no libraries. There's no essential infrastructure. If you go to any tavern, to any community, the taverns that are there outnumber the schools by 20 to 1, 30 to 1. You'll be lucky if you find more than one library in a given community, or if you find a library at all. So alcohol has been used as a weapon against people, for economic suppression in terms of colonization. And where we are right now, I think still I do still think that it's doing us a disservice because we are using it as a form of escapism. We are not responsible with our alcohol, and this shows in the amount of accidents that are as a result of alcohol. It shows as a result of trauma injuries that happen as a result of alcohol, of murders, of abuse, and all other forms of social ills that you can link in one way or the other back to alcohol, and how it is so prevalent and pervasive in our communities. So I'm of the opinion that we really need to relook our relationship with alcohol, and whether we want to sit down and be saying that we don't have a problem with alcohol when we can look back in black communities and realize that, look, alcohol is pervasive, and it's at the backbone of many of the social ills that are happening. And how do we then approach fixing ourselves without this? And then when we fix ourselves, maybe we can enjoy a drink being
yeah,
responsible. But right now, uh, we don't even have opportunities in alcohol.
yeah,
you know uh, Alcohol is an industry that we don't participate in, but we are the biggest consumer. We are the biggest consumers of alcohol. So it's another glaring example of our consumerist problem that we have, whereby we happy to consume the most expensive Scottish alcohol, Dutch alcohol, and American alcohol, but we don't sit down and say how we can monetize this, because
yeah,
it's a product that we consume, how we can then bring that value back. If you go back to JSE, AB InBev is always solidly in the top three, top four. It's never out of there. The same as your tobacco companies, they're always up there. How do we then monetize this to work for us, the people who consume it the most? And until we find ways of doing that, maybe we should relook at our relationship as being consumers of alcohol, because on top of the social ills, it really just doesn't benefit us in any way. And we might speak of the jobs, but can the jobs not be diverted elsewhere if we are really starting to be a producer-centric economy amongst ourselves as a people, and trying to make sure that we have the rent circulating more amongst us as a community before it leaves our community and it leaves the country as a whole. And that's my long and short on alcohol and consuming alcohol.
Okay, no, that's powerful. Thank you, Yamkela. This was very empowering. And I have no doubt Utama Brownies Amahle will find this very empowering, inspiring, and challenging. You know, it's always about triggering a thought process that will lead us to the point that you're talking about, moving away from consumerism to becoming, you know, people who think about how we monetize something and how it can be more of producers than consumers. I will be in touch. I think there's a whole lot of conversations that we need to have, I think, over a longer period of time. But thank you for your time.
No, well, definitely. Thank you. Maybe we can have a weekly, and take it from there.
Yeah, that sounds dope. Let's do that. Like, I'll
Yeah,
send you a
really
message.
nice. Yeah, thank you so much, Kotma.
Sure.